Here you go.
Okay, so should we start?
Yeah, we can start. Just assume you have this, you make the most of this. Don't worry about trivialities like should we start and all that. Just go directly to the questions.
Sure, sir. So I would like to begin with what made you choose IIT BHU to pursue your bachelor's?
That's a funny story. I wasn't a very high ranker, as you can imagine. I was somewhere in the 1700s out of 2,000 students that got in that year. But, and there's a variety of reasons why that score is sort of relevant and not relevant. But my interview process was incredible. And my brother was actually very smart. He was like 27 All India. And so he was in Kharagpur doing electronics, and he's also their top ranker. I forget what they call it, the PGM, President Gold Medalist or whatnot in electronics. Those days there was no computer science. So I went to Kharagpur fully in, thinking I was going to join Kharagpur. Obviously, the number of branches I had available in Kharagpur was more limited, but their food was so bad. Oh my God! And believe it or not, the food was so bad. I said, I'm not staying here 5 years. So I decided. Next day when I came in and I expressed that, one IIT BHU professor, I forget who it was, said, oh yeah, we have private messes, you run the messes yourself and you get really good food, which actually is true. Our food is probably the best among all the IITs, okay? And that caught on to me. So I asked him, okay, what's the best branch in IIT BHU? He said, metallurgy. So I said, okay, I'm taking metallurgy. You're very young. See, we didn't do the 10+2, we did the 11 and then straight into college. So it was then called Senior Cambridge. So I did Senior Cambridge. It's still called Senior Cambridge, but now it's a 10+2. Then it was a 10+1. So we had a 5-year program. And I was very young. I was anyways 2 years younger than my batchmates. So when I got to 79, I'm just trying to think of what my age was. 74 is when we joined. Yeah, so I was 16 years old when I joined. Okay. So that
yes,
basically,
sir.
you're very impressionable, you're not mature, you just make decisions. That's how I got to IIT BHU. But I have no regrets.
Sure, sir. Very glad to hear that, sir. So my next question would be, what were your initial impressions and anticipations upon entering the college as a first-year student?
So you wanted to know what my expectations were? Is that the question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What did you plan just before entering the college? Like
So,
what?
no, here's the problem. I'm telling you, I'm glad you guys have a 10+2 now and a 4-year program, because you want to get to college when you're more sort of mature. Like if I compare myself to my kids who went to school in the US, so my daughter went to school at Stanford, right? And she joined with a pre-medical disposition, changed to something else, eventually found her calling and graduated with a design major and a computer science minor. My other daughter went to USC and she changed branches 5 times. Yeah, she started with, I forget what she started with, maybe biomedical engineering, ended up with industrial engineering, but actually went to work for a venture capital. So part of the whole premise that's different between the US and India, and I think the US system is more successful because of that, is that they assume that you really don't know all the information you need to know to figure out what you want to do. So they allow you to switch disciplines. When I tried to do that in second year, I wanted to go to mechanical engineering because my dad was a mechanical engineer for no other reason, not because I had a good framework. I got yelled at by Dr. Anantram, who was then he's the father of the metallurgy department, and he's why the metallurgy department was considered one of the best in the country, in the world also. So he yelled at me, he said, why do you want to leave metallurgy? We're the best department in India. Look at this watch, it's German, and it always keeps time. If you don't have any pride to be Indian, this is the one department that we should be proud of, and blah, blah, blah. And eventually I was so intimidated, I said, screw it, let's not even try and change departments. So that's how I ended up in metallurgy. But look at me right now. I'm in a computer science driven company. As I did metallurgy for maybe 5 years, but then after that I quit, and now everything I do is with software.
True, sir. Very true. Also, sir, could you please share some of your remarkable experiences you encountered during your stay in campus, and how did these shape you?
What were, well, the remarkable stay that I used to find now in hindsight, when I was there, it was not remarkable. It seemed just like regular and normal. Was that when we used to come to lunch at the messes, see, in your time, I think what happens, everybody whips out their phone and they start looking at their phone and what messages have come, Twitter, blah, blah, blah. We didn't have phones. So one of the things that was remarkable was we used to quiz each other at lunch. Like somebody would say 2, 5, 22, 27, what's the next number? You know, like a series. And people are like, okay, what is it? Or the balance of the time was spent with personal experiences that people would recount. And often, which is very culturally different. In India, we laugh at the expense of other human beings. We make fun of other human beings. That's very normal for us. Like somebody will come to me and say, you know, oh, you cut your hair too short, you know, and they'll start laughing. In the US, that's absolutely not the case. You always create comedy. I mean, you do comedy, but on ethnic groups, but even that is not considered very tasteful. What is tasteful is you can create comedy like British comedy, which is, you know, situational. You know, you come out. So we would, the rest of the time at lunch and dinner, they would be making fun of, you know, situations, typically with either the lab assistant or maybe the lobby servant or some student who was sleeping and snoring and whatnot. So it was kind of crazy, but what was really impressionable was how much everybody was willing to help other people, because there was no like safety net, right? You had each other. And if you got in trouble, you go ask somebody for notes and he'd give you his notes just like that and say, I missed the class, here's your notes. And so you read the notes, and man, this is so good. Can I get all your notes before the exam? And the guy'd say yes. And you'd rely. So I relied on somebody else's notes pretty much all 3 years. The other big difference is our first 2 years didn't count. In the final grades, they didn't count. So what happened the first 2 years was pure musty. You know, everybody's having a good time. And on third year onwards, we got serious. So first 2 years, it was like, oh, let's have, not everybody, but the guys who were like the troublemakers, they were all having a lot of fun.
So we too also share similar experiences, sir, during our time also.
You do. Well, good. That's the way it should be. If that's lost, then you know it's not IIT BHU.
Sure, sir. Sure. Also, sir, could you please provide your insights into your journey, as you yourself are a very successful entrepreneur and have held such senior positions in firms like Syngenta and even your own venture, mykaarma?
Well, both of those were my own ventures. So here's a couple of key seminal moments for me. First, but everybody was applying to go to the US and everybody was applying to get a job, Disco and Telco and all these firms then that were supposed to be what I call like the staple, you know, Hindustan Lever, et cetera, et cetera. I decided for some unknown reason that I was going to A, stay in India, B, start a firm of my own. So I didn't want to work for anybody. And I think part of it, maybe, to be very honest today, was this like the insecurity of, hey, will I really do well in a big firm? You know, nobody, see, in India, positive reinforcement is not part of our model. So when you go to college, they talk a lot about how metallurgy department is really good, but they don't talk about how the students are really good. I mean, if you think about it, my time, there were 200,000, 2 lakhs people who took the test and 2,000 got it, right? So what is that? You're good at math. Tell me what the percentage is.
Could you please repeat, sir?
2,000 divided by 200,000. What is the percentage? 2 divided by 200. 1 divided by 100. So it's 1%, right?
Yes, sir.
So in your case, now I've been looking and the numbers even dropped. It's 0.6%.
Yes, sir. 0.61.
Yeah, 0.61%. There, you know the exact number. So we're obviously the elite in India. If you use testing as as a metric, right? So nobody ever reinforced that with you to say, hey, you're very good. Don't worry. Whatever you do, you're going to be successful if you put your mind to it, which is a very much a part of the curriculum here in the US, where positive reinforcement is part of the teaching experience. Everybody's encouraging you. Everybody's always saying good things to you. So I decided I was going to run my own company. That way the fate was in my own hands and I could either succeed or fail. And it was not a very good move. So I almost went bankrupt in 2 years. I started a small business in Ranchi, which we used to make. We took a business plan that the government had created, which was another mistake. And I tried to make some machinery for steel plants, which there was no demand for. So, it was like some bureaucrat, some civil servant had written down a business plan, didn't understand marketing, didn't understand marketing research, etc. So I was almost broke in 2 years. And what changed my sort of outlook was one day I came back from a trip outside my town, and there was one of my workers from my factory was standing there, and he had his baby in his arm and his wife next to him. And he basically started by saying, I asked him, hey, what are you doing here? And the guy says, well, my local grocery store has stopped giving me udhar. And so I said, really? Why did they stop giving you credit, udhar? He said, oh, because I haven't paid him for 2 months. I said, why haven't you paid him for 2 months? He said, well, because you haven't paid me for 3 months. I said, huh? We haven't paid you for 3 months. What didn't strike me was that when you sell, you also have to collect the money. And so we were overdrafting from our bank account and we'd run to our limit. And my office manager, tried to tell me that this is happening. I was not willing to listen. I was running around closing deals and thinking that's what it took. So it was a very basic lesson, which made me realize that, hey, cash flow is important, meaning collecting the money is important. And the reason people work for you is so that they get their salary. If they don't get their salary, they're going to stop working for you. So I've never missed payroll from that day. And that, I'm telling you, happened in 1981. So if you think about it, these are very simple lessons, but they teach you, themes that are magnified beyond normal proportions. So it was a very interesting, that was one big seminal moment. The other thing that made me eventually come to the US was I found that in India, it didn't matter how good your product was. Eventually, we discovered a little niche that we started focusing on, and that niche was basically reverse engineering heavy earth-moving equipment spare parts. And the spare parts were strictly for machines made in Russia. And the Russian machines are not very high quality machines. So it's very easy for me to engineer parts that was better than their life. So I eventually had a very successful business with all these collieries and their trucks lined out outside my factory. And I tried to keep it a secret because in my industrial area, there were 42 firms. A lot of people were wondering, who's this 22-year-old guy who's got so much demand, whereas all the other firms were declaring themselves sick, which means they can't repay the loan that they're taking from, let's say, Bihar State Financial Corporation or State Bank or whatnot. So, but I realized, in spite of the fact that I was making really, really good equipment, because all my customers, or the bulk of my customers, were government customers, there was a lot of corruption involved, a lot. And that was what eventually tipped me in going to the US, because my brother, who, as I told you earlier, was a very smart, helpful comp science graduate working for a company, a software company in California. And my mother used to keep explaining to me how his life was so much more, predictable and I'd say comfortable. So I eventually took the GRE, got to Austin, got my MBA, then got a break and went to work in Wall Street as an investment banking research associate. So used to work in the research department. And that was very eye-opening because, here's a kid from Bihar who's never been outside India and is in Wall Street in New York, and I'm learning how the capital markets work. So all that helped me in my journey of becoming an entrepreneur.
Thanks a lot, sir. These were really insightful. So the next question would be, how has this institute prepared you for your futures, for your future? And you mentioned your insights. Like, how has the institute helped in you managing them efficiently?
So really, if you think about the institute, what's the role of the institute? One is to create an awesome environment for learning, right? That's number one, I'd say. Number two is to actually teach you, right? Number three, give you infrastructure that helps with that learning. I'd say, when I went to college, number two and three, they failed completely. No, actually, number two, to be fair, if I was the metallurgist, number two also, they did a good job. And number three also did a good job. But I'm looking across the institute with all my friends in other departments and all. The teaching was substandard. The infrastructure was substandard, to be very candid, right? But because the environment was all these really bright people, our first director, when I was there, there was a alumni meet in San Jose very, very early on. And I asked him, I said, how I asked him, or somebody asked him, may not have been me, but the answer was this. The question was, how did you figure out why, in that time it was called BHU IT, that you needed to attach BHU IT to the joint entrance exam? Because we were the third batch of joint entrance, right? So he said, well, I had a very simple question. And my answer is based on his answer. He said, I have infrastructure, I have teachers, and I have students. And I can improve all three. The latter two is the most expensive to improve. If I could just improve the input, I think the quality of this institute would automatically go up. And that's what he did. He attached us to the JEE, which allowed the IIT students to start entering. And that's sort of what has happened now. I think there are 20 IITs now. I don't know how many there are. There's quite a few, right?
Yes, sir. 21 IITs.
21. And at my time, it was 5. We were the 5th. And we weren't considered an IIT. We were just considered somebody that used the same entrance exam. So some of the most successful, again, depending on how you define success, if you define social service success, then there are people like Satynath Sarangi, who's in Bhopal. He was in metallurgy 1 year senior to me. There was Subhash Gatade, who was in my class, who's in Delhi doing social work. If you look at economic success, you have like Jay Chaudhary, who I think was 3 years after us. He was also a graduate of BHU IT. At that time, we were not called IIT. And I think we worked as part of the Alumni Association to push to get us acknowledged as the IIT, even though Roorkee got acknowledged prior to this. Although Roorkee was not part of the joint entrance exam. So all in all, I'd say, the school prepared me with this amazing group of classmates who pushed you, made you better. And my department, metallurgy, was really very well run because of Dr. Anand. The professors were very good. The infrastructure was very good. Had I stuck to metallurgy, I'm sure I'd be a world-class material scientist right now.
Very glad to hear that, sir. Very glad. Like, even myself also, we feel that we are surrounded by such exceptional people that if we don't keep on working, we'll fall behind. Like,
Yes.
we'll not be able to cope up with them. So I resonate with that.
Right. And the thing is, when you're in high school, you tend to be the better students, right? You're in the top of your class, so you think, I've had it made. When you come to BHU and to IIT BHU, all of a sudden everybody like you. In fact, many are better than you, right? Like I remember one guy, I don't know if you guys use this book or not, Halliday Resnick, it's physics book.
Yes, sir.
So the
Yes,
first physics exam that we had to take, it was only like 2 months into the first year, and there was a guy called VP Singh who was a mechanic, a very bright guy. I still remember talking to him, and he had done his intermediate, so he'd come in older than me. But he finished every question of every chapter in the book. I was like, oh my God, these guys are so bright. But actually what happens is that was not a fair comparison. They came in with 2 more years of education than I did. So by third year, we were all sort of now at the same level. And then the true people, who the cream of the crop, rose to the top. And I was certainly not a top ranker, but there were some really bright guys in our class.
Okay, sir. So my last question would be, what key advices would you like to give to the students who aspire to be like you?
One key advice is don't look at short term. If you look at me, I came 5 years after everybody else moved to the US, my classmates. And I'd say I'm reasonably successful because I followed my passion. So the first thing I'd suggest is don't worry about short-term salaries. Don't go by, oh, this guy's paying me, 10,000 more, and that guy's paying me 5,000 more. In life, it's an exponential curve. And what that means is initially you might just work for a firm where you're just picking up your skill. And there's a guy in the US whose name is Malcolm Gladwell. And I don't know if it's his rule, but in his book, he talks about the 10,000 hour rule. It takes you 10,000 hours to become an expert in any field. But once you hit the 10,000 hours, then there's an exponential rise. And, there are lots of people, you watch their careers very late in life. All of a sudden, they'll explode. They'll become very successful at whatever they're doing, whether it's social service, whether it's being an administrative person, a bureaucrat, an entrepreneur, an engineer, a research scientist, a professor. It doesn't matter which discipline you pick. But you have to figure out what you're passionate about. And unfortunately, the Indian school system doesn't let you do that at the time you enter. Or I don't know how easy it is now, but I know in my time it was very hard to shift from one major to the other. And everybody, because we are so resource constrained, assumes that making the most money out of college is the best thing for you. So you're an electronics guy, right? Or you're a computer science. What are you?
Electronics.
Electronics. So electronics, computer science are considered really esoteric disciplines, and where if you can get in there, man, you'll make the most money when you get out. But it doesn't, let's say you hate chip design. So you hate math for whatever reason, and you like some other things like managing people, etc. Then maybe being in CS and in electronics is not your cup of tea. You might want to figure out what you really enjoy. So that's the biggest lesson I'd say. And the other one is something that somebody told me. There's no shortcuts in life. When you think you're going to get someplace because you went in and you got a lucky break, you get a lucky break because you're working hard. So I was saying in my company that you will only pick up the $100 bills on the side of the road if you keep walking down the road, i.e. you got to keep working, then the breaks will come. If you hope that a break shows up magically, yes, when you look at it from the outside, it optically looks like this guy got a lucky break. He had an IPO, like he listed his company, and look at how rich he got. And nobody remembers that this guy slaved it out. He was working hard when everybody was sleeping. So that's what the two things, one, figure out what you want to do and double down on it. And two, work your tail off, because there's no substitute for hard work. Everybody's intelligent, right? But what makes the difference? That little bit at the edge that you push yourself harder than everybody else. And you see that in sports athletes all the time, right? I mean, we got our first gold medal in the World Games, right? The guy who threw the javelin, I forget his name, Chopra, right?
Neeraj Chopra, sir.
Neeraj Chopra. If you look at him, his journey, like he got beat very recently by the Pakistani guy, and then he won the Tokyo Olympics, and then he came back so it's a constant journey, and I'm sure nobody knows the amount of hard work he does, what he eats, the discipline, the exercise. What you just see is that he won the gold medal, right? But there's so much work. It's like an iceberg. Underneath the water level, there is so much work that goes into being visible as a successful person. And the last piece is, don't forget that you owe your school, your country, the people who are less fortunate, something. Because, you know, when you're successful, you know, when I hear family members in my family here complain about, oh, we're going 70 miles to attend this little event of a friend or a classmate, I tell them that, listen, when I was going to college, I couldn't afford a bicycle. So I had to borrow a bicycle from a guy who was 6 feet 2 inches tall. And he insisted on sitting on the handlebar. So to go to Gadolia to watch a movie, I had to pedal 10 kilometers like this because I couldn't see in front of me. The guy had a turban. He was a Sikh. He had a turban. So compared to that, all you're doing is sitting in an air-conditioned car and putting your foot on the accelerator. So, you know, you have to be cognizant that you've been blessed. Because of that, you have to give back to the community, whether that's by a lot of people. You know, the Americans are the most generous, like, country in the world. We give back more than any other country, percentage-wise, dollar-wise. Dollar-wise, it's understandable because this is the richest nation in the world. But percentage-wise, also, we're right up there, right? So why does that happen? Because our school system tells you that you have to be empathetic. You cannot just only think about yourself. You have to worry about other people. You have to give back. And it's surprising how few people do that compared to, you know, most Western cultures, you know. Partly maybe because you had to fight your way to get there. So you're trying to protect it. But remember, if you got, like, if you're blessed, you're not going to take that money with you. It's not going to lie in your casket, you know. Just put it to good use. Like I'll put a plug in for a group. I saw a Netflix documentary called Daughters of Destiny. And they're out of Bangalore. This guy runs a school for the Dalits, and he picks one kid from each family, and their whole education is paid for. You know, 2-3 years ago, their kids, actually, one kid went to Stanford for chemical engineering. And this kid's father is, you know what, Pani Puri vendor somewhere in Bangalore, in a tailor. And there are other kids like that. Some went to Cornell, some went to other colleges. And if you can help them, you know, all it takes for Americans, especially, even for Indians, I think it doesn't take that much money to sponsor one kid. You're going to change their lives. And they all don't have to come to Stanford. They could go to a good college in India, which is the bulk of the kids go to good colleges in India. They could, you know, they get a living. They then also give back, and then this whole thing becomes bigger. I mean, example is this guy Chopra, right? There were 3 guys on our team that were in the top 6, right? There was him, or top 5, I think. All one of us could do is start a GoFundMe on, you know, GoFundMe, and said this money will go towards creating world-class facilities for these 3 guys to train and anybody else who wants to train. And if you train for discus or javelin or shot put or any one of those sports, the facilities are common. And if every guy in the US, just IIT BHU guys, put $100 in there, just 100, which I'm telling you, you spend on a meal, these guys would have world-class facilities. And they would, in the next year, may not be soon enough, I mean, maybe too soon, but 5 years from now, or 5 years from now, when the next Olympics comes around, we'd have a great show, right? Our relay team, right? You look at our relay team, they almost cracked it. And of course, we didn't have enough depth. Like, if you look at the Americans in the finals, they switched 3 out of the 4 runners. We had to run the same guys who had run one day before. They're obviously not very, I mean, you don't have enough time to recover. So even though we have 1.4 billion people, we don't have like 8 runners who can run 4x400. So there's some life lessons that I would put back to our people. Be empathetic, work hard. When you're successful, don't forget where you came from, etc., etc.
Thanks a lot, sir. So this concludes the meeting. Really appreciate you giving your time, sir.
No problem. I will send you the recording, and feel free to use it as you want, cut it up, and you know, use whichever section you like.